There was a time when every night began with a question. People would walk outside, tilt their heads back, and breathe in the infinite. They didn't have the answers. Perhaps they never would, but that wasn't the point. It was enough to wonder. It was enough to look up. But somewhere along the line, humanity forgot to. We built towers to touch the clouds, yet none of us stopped to feel the wind. We filled our cities with light, and in doing so, we erased the stars. We replaced constellations with notifications, the Milky Way with blue screens, and silence with the hum of electricity. And when the last child on Earth stopped asking what lay beyond the horizon, the sky sighed quietly, unseen. I still remember when the heavens used to be a mirror. Every culture, every generation found their reflection in it. The ancient farmers saw gods plowing the fields of the night. Sailors saw the pathways of their ancestors carved in light. Lovers saw promises written between the stars, too far to touch but close enough to believe in. The sky was not just a ceiling, it was a story. But now our stories are shorter. They fit inside screens, scrolls, and seconds. The stars, once symbols of eternity, are now pixel filters or background noise for advertisements. No one asks why Orion raises his bow each winter or why the moon never stays the same. The myths that once taught us wonder have been replaced by data and deadlines. When was the last time you looked up? Not to check the weather, not to photograph a sunset, but simply to remember what it feels like to be small? There was a night once, long ago, when the sky flickered with light that no telescope could explain. People gathered in the streets, some afraid, others amazed. It was not a meteor, not a satellite, not even a message. It was simply beauty, raw, unmeasured, unmonetized. For a few minutes, humanity remembered. And then the glow faded, and everyone returned to their screens. I wonder if the sky missed us after that. If clouds drifted slower, waiting for someone to notice their shapes. If the stars dimmed themselves in mourning, unseen above our cities. If the moon ever whispered, "Do you still need me?" to a world too busy to answer. There is something tragic about progress when it forgets its roots. We reached for the heavens and we succeeded. Rockets, satellites, colonies in orbit. We touched the stars, but in doing so, we lost the reason we reached for them. We went from dreamers to engineers, from believers to calculators. And in that trade, we gained precision but lost poetry. The old astronomers used to say that the universe was written in light. Every star, a sentence. Every planet, a pause. They believed to read the sky was to understand ourselves. Now we decode wavelengths and radiation, we map galaxies and simulate birth of stars. We know more than ever, but we feel less. It is not knowledge that makes us human. It is awe. It is that quiet moment when a person stands beneath the vastness of everything and realizes how small, fragile, and miraculous existence truly is. And without awe, even the infinite becomes ordinary. I imagine a day in the far future when someone might rediscover wonder. Perhaps a child born in a megacity who climbs to the rooftop and sees a single star through the smog. Perhaps an astronaut on a lonely mission who turns off the ship's lights just to feel the darkness again. Perhaps you, listening to this now, might step outside tonight and look up. Not to find an answer, just to ask a question. Because questions are what connect us to the cosmos. They remind us that we are not the center, but a part of something vast and alive. The universe does not need us to understand it. It only needs us to notice. If you listen closely, you can still hear the echoes of that noticing. They live in ancient lullabies sung to sleeping children, in old paintings of comets drawn by trembling hands, in the stories our ancestors told by firelight when the night felt endless. They looked up, and in that act alone they belonged. We too can belong again. We just have to remember where to look. Maybe the sky never left us. Maybe it's been waiting, quietly patient, shimmering behind the haze of our indifference. Maybe it's whispering even now, through the soft static of our cities. I am still here. I have always been here. Look up. And maybe if we do, we'll remember that every heartbeat, every breath, every fleeting life is part of the same great unfolding above us. Not separate, not forgotten, not meaningless. Just small notes in the eternal music of the sky. When humanity stopped looking up, the universe did not mourn. It simply waited, because it knew one day someone would look up again. There was a time when every constellation had a story. They were not just stars scattered in darkness, they were memories drawn in light. Heroes, monsters, lovers, gods, and dreams, all frozen above us, reminding humanity of where imagination met the infinite. But now, the sky is full of constellations without names. The lines that once connected them have faded. No one remembers where the hunter stood or where the swan spread her wings. The stories that once bound the stars together have dissolved into static and silence. We still see the same heavens, but not the same meaning. It is strange how something can remain unchanged, yet feel completely lost. The constellations did not leave us. We left them. We stopped passing their names to our children. We stopped whispering myths under the stars. We forgot that stories were the bridges between heaven and earth. Once an old astronomer said that naming the stars was humanity's first act of love. To give meaning to something unreachable is to declare that it matters. But when everything must be measured to be valued, love becomes irrelevant. We map the sky with numbers now, not with wonder. Coordinates replaced myths. Data replaced devotion. And so the stars became silent. I imagine them watching us, the way parents watch their grown children. Proud, but distant. Perhaps they whisper to one another about the days when humans looked up and saw more than light. When we saw reflections of our own longing. When we believed that the stars were watching back. In ancient times, the sky was a library. Every civilization wrote their stories there in the only language they all understood: light. To lose those stories is to lose a part of who we are. And yet, that is exactly what happened. The constellations are still written above us, but the language has been forgotten. There is no longer a hunter named Orion or a goddess named Cassiopeia. There are only designations, Greek letters, catalog numbers, sterile codes. We still study their brightness, their temperature, their distance. But not their meaning. And meaning was what made them human. The night sky once gave us direction, spiritually, emotionally, physically. Now it is just background noise for satellites. We have mapped every coordinate but lost every connection. We send probes to the edges of the solar system but cannot find our own place within it. I wonder what the stars think of us. If they could speak, would they ask, "Why did you stop naming us?" Would they grieve the silence of our myths? Or would they simply wait, patient as always, knowing that forgetting is temporary, that one day we will look up again with new eyes and new names? Because humanity has always been both forgetful and resilient. We forget what matters until it's gone. And then, in the quiet aftermath, we remember. Perhaps one day, a child will look at the night sky and see not coordinates but stories again. They'll trace invisible lines between the stars and invent their own constellations. A bird, a friend, a dream. They won't need history books to tell them what to see. They will simply feel it. And in that moment, the forgotten constellations will have new names. There's beauty in reinvention. The universe doesn't demand that we remember. It only invites us to imagine. The constellations don't need to be ancient. They just need to be meaningful. The shapes we draw in the sky are mirrors of our hearts. And if our hearts change, so will the heavens. For centuries, humans looked at the stars to find guidance. Sailors navigated oceans by them. Poets measured love against their distance. Philosophers compared their silence to human ignorance. And now, perhaps, scientists use them to measure time itself. Different eyes, same stars. Different meanings, same light. But without wonder, the universe is nothing but coordinates and calculations. Without stories, constellations are just patterns in randomness. And without imagination, humanity is just a species that forgot how to dream. The tragedy isn't that the stars are nameless now. It's that we no longer feel the need to name them. Because to name something is to see it, to love it, to acknowledge that it matters. When we stopped naming the stars, we also stopped naming the sacred in ourselves. Yet, I believe the sky forgives us. It has always been patient. It has seen empires rise and fall, oceans shift, and languages die. It knows that forgetting is part of being human, but so is remembering. One day we will remember that the night sky is not empty. It is alive with memories waiting to be spoken again. And when that day comes, our first act won't be scientific, it will be poetic. We'll lift our heads, trace our fingers across the sky, and whisper names into the dark. Maybe they won't be the old names. Maybe Orion will become the Wanderer, and Cassiopeia will become the Dreamer. Maybe new stories will rise where the old ones faded. And maybe, in that act, we will rediscover what it means to belong to something larger than ourselves. Because naming is belonging. And belonging is what we lost when we stopped looking up. The constellations without names are not gone. They are waiting, softly glowing in the infinite dark, hoping someone will remember how to tell stories again. And when that happens, when one voice whispers a new name into the night, the stars will listen. And for the first time in centuries, they will shine a little brighter. The sky never turned away, even when humanity did. When cities began to glow brighter than the stars, the heavens learned to wait. It stretched endlessly above glass towers and digital suns, its ancient light drowned by neon and noise. But still, it watched. Patient. Eternal. In the beginning, the sky spoke in constellations, quiet stories traced by wonder. Humans once read them like letters from something greater, something both beautiful and terrifying. They used to lift their heads, asking questions not for answers, but for meaning. But that stopped when they built screens brighter than hope itself. Now the sky looks down upon billions of eyes turned toward blue light, not starlight. It sees faces lit by devices that promise connection, yet deepen loneliness. The stars, forgotten messengers of the cosmos, have become invisible behind layers of pollution, both of air and of thought. There was a night. The first night no human looked up. It wasn't written in history books, yet it was felt by the universe. A silence unlike any other fell upon the constellations. No one made a wish on a shooting star. No child asked what the moon was made of. The heavens, for the first time, whispered into emptiness. The auroras still danced out of habit. The comets still came, faithful to their cycles. The Milky Way still shimmered faintly, a ghostly river across the black. But there were no witnesses. Above, satellites blinked, the artificial stars of a species that stopped believing in wonder. They circled the Earth endlessly, transmitting data, not dreams. The sky saw them as scars, reminders of a time when humans once reached upward with hope instead of hunger. From orbit, Earth glowed beautifully tragic. A sphere of color and chaos, veiled by clouds that reflected the sadness of a species too busy to notice beauty. The atmosphere trembled with light pollution, yet the real light, the kind that spoke to souls, grew dimmer each year. And still, the sky waited. It had patience older than civilization. It remembered the first eyes that saw it, the hunters, the sailors, the dreamers who drew meaning from stars. It remembered Galileo's trembling hands, the poets who wrote of infinity, the lovers who traced constellations into each other's skin. It remembered them all. The sky held those memories in silence like a parent holding faded photographs. It did not rage. It did not weep. It simply was. But silence, when held too long, becomes heavy. And in that stillness, something began to change. The stars, unobserved, began to fade not from the universe, but from memory. The constellations broke apart, not in the heavens, but in the human mind. The myths that once connected heaven and earth dissolved into forgotten code. Archived in digital libraries no one opened anymore. And when meaning fades, even beauty begins to feel hollow. The sky saw people walk through cities without seeing the horizon. It saw them measuring time by deadlines instead of sunsets. The moon, once a goddess, now a logo. The stars, once gods, now nothing more than dead light in forgotten textbooks. But among the billions, there were still a few who remembered. A boy standing alone on a rooftop, staring past the light haze, trying to count the stars his ancestors once named. A woman by the window, whispering to the moon as if it still listened. A child on a camping trip, seeing the Milky Way for the first time, breathless with awe. The sky noticed them. It always did. Because even if humanity forgets, wonder has a way of surviving. In moments, not monuments. The sky has learned to listen for those small moments. A gasp, a tear, a heartbeat that skips at the sight of a meteor's fall. For wonder does not need many. It only needs one who dares to look up. And somewhere, as night unfolds its dark wings across the world, a single gaze lifts again. The first in a long time. It breaks the silence. It reawakens something cosmic, fragile yet infinite. The sky watches. It listens. And for the first time in centuries, it smiles. He was the last astronomer who still believed the sky could feel. His name had long been erased from the digital archives, but the remnants of his observatory still stood on a hill of rust and silence. Once it had been a place where wonder bloomed, where children lined up to peer through telescopes and see the shimmering pulse of galaxies far beyond their reach. Now it was a graveyard of mirrors, shattered and dusty, reflecting only the pale light of artificial satellites. He would come here every night, dragging his old chair across the cracked floor, the wood creaking in rhythm with his breath. He would stare at the empty sky, where once the constellations had told stories, the hunter, the lion, the twins. But now, only a dull haze of city light smothered everything sacred. He remembered when people used to wish upon stars, when silence was a prayer, and distance was awe. Now the stars were nothing but data points, catalogued, compressed, and forgotten. He turned on his telescope, a relic from an era when science and wonder still spoke the same language. The lenses groaned as they aligned. Dust danced in the dim light of his lamp. Through the glass he searched, not for a planet or a comet, but for a feeling. He wanted to remember what it was like to look up and believe. But the sky did not respond. It stared back at him, mute, indifferent. The stars, those ancient storytellers, had been drowned by the glow of screens and towers. Humanity no longer looked upward. Their eyes were fixed on pixels, their dreams confined to glass rectangles glowing in their palms. The old man sighed. He whispered, "Maybe the sky stopped looking back when we stopped caring." He reached for a worn notebook, the last of his handwritten journals. The pages were filled with sketches of constellations, annotated with names that no longer appeared in modern star maps. He wrote by candlelight, his handwriting trembling, but deliberate. If the stars are still out there, perhaps they're simply waiting for us to remember. Outside, wind brushed through the dry grass. Somewhere in the valley below, drones hummed, ferrying goods between cities that had forgotten what darkness looked like. He envied the night sky of the past, a canvas of infinity, unbroken by neon, untouched by satellites. He began building again. Not a telescope, but something new, a bridge between memory and machine. He had salvaged fragments of old lenses, bits of circuit boards, even shards of broken mirrors from the observatory's ruin. Piece by piece, he assembled them into a device he called the Rememberer. It wasn't designed to see the sky, but to hear it. The first night he activated it, the machine pulsed softly, like a heart trying to remember its beat. Static filled the room, a whisper between worlds. Then, for a brief moment, he heard something faint, almost impossible. A tone that felt alive. It was the kind of sound you couldn't measure, only feel. He smiled for the first time in years. He adjusted the dials. The signal strengthened, then faded again, like a memory slipping away. "Is that you?" he whispered into the static. "Are you still there?" No answer came, only silence stretching like the horizon. Still, he recorded it, every flicker, every whisper. He believed the sky was speaking, even if humanity had forgotten its language. Weeks passed. The man's health faded, but his devotion deepened. He no longer ate much, nor slept. Each night he listened to the sky, letting the sound wash over him like waves from an invisible ocean. He started to write messages in return, transmitting them through the Rememberer, not with data or coordinates, but with poetry. He sent out verses written in human longing, hoping the sky would remember what love sounded like. Then one night, the static changed. It grew rhythmic, deliberate, like breathing. His heart pounded. He turned every dial, every switch. The air seemed to hum with anticipation. The light of the machine flickered once, twice, then stabilized. And from within the noise, a single tone emerged, deep, resonant, and impossibly familiar. Tears blurred his vision. He whispered, "You remembered?" He didn't know what it meant, whether it was merely an echo of his own signal bouncing off debris in orbit or something else entirely. But in that moment, he didn't care. For the first time in decades, he felt the same wonder that had once defined his life. The stars were not lost. They were simply waiting for someone to listen. When morning came, the villagers found his observatory quiet. The Rememberer still pulsed faintly, repeating a single transmission into the void. A message written in trembling handwriting beside it. "The stars are still here. We were the ones who went missing." He was gone, peacefully, as if dissolved into the very silence he had spent his life trying to understand. That night, as the villagers looked up for the first time in years, the clouds parted, and above them, through the fading glow of the city, faint constellations flickered once more, not bright, but enough to remind them of something ancient. The man's message had reached them, not through technology, but through memory. And far above, somewhere beyond the noise, the stars burned a little brighter. as if to say, "We never forgot you. You just stopped looking up." It began quietly, not with revolutions nor grand speeches, but with a single child standing in the middle of a city that never slept, holding a cracked telescope once owned by her grandfather. Her name was Lyra, though no one remembered names much anymore. People were known by their data IDs, by their relevance scores, by what they produced, not what they dreamed. But Lyra? She dreamed of stars. She had found the telescope buried beneath the dust of an abandoned observatory. The building was silent, overgrown with ivy and memory. On the floor, among the ruins, she discovered a notebook. Its pages yellowed, but its handwriting still alive. On the first page were the words, "The stars are still here. We were the ones who went missing." She didn't understand at first. The world she lived in was bright, too bright. The sky was veiled by the eternal glow of billboards and orbital satellites. Nobody looked up anymore because there was nothing left to see. But that night, she carried the telescope home anyway. Her apartment was small, tucked between towers of glass. She opened her window and turned off every light she could. For a moment, she saw nothing but darkness, a rare, unfamiliar thing. Then she looked through the telescope. Static, noise, just gray. She almost turned away, but then a flicker. A single star, faint, trembling, but real. Her breath caught. It was like hearing the voice of something ancient, a whisper from the deep past, reaching through the silence. She smiled, tears forming as if her body remembered something her mind had forgotten. She stayed like that for hours, eyes pressed to the lens, until dawn washed the sky pale again. The next night, she returned. And the next? Soon her neighbors noticed. The strange girl on the balcony pointing an old device at the nothingness above. Some laughed. Others recorded her out of curiosity. But one by one, something changed. Someone turned off their window light to see what she was looking at. Then another. And another. Within weeks, small corners of the city began to darken, not from neglect, but from choice. People wanted to see what she saw. They wanted to remember. Videos began to spread. A girl finding the stars again. A child pointing upward when everyone else looked down. It became a quiet kind of revolution, not trending, not loud, but human. Scientists joined in. They reopened the old observatories, cleaned their lenses, recalibrated their instruments. The data they found astonished them. The stars were burning brighter, or perhaps the air was simply clearer. People began to question why they had ever stopped looking in the first place. Philosophers wrote essays titled The Return of Wonder. Artists painted constellations on the walls of subways. Poets wrote verses on screensavers that faded into darkness every midnight, forcing the viewer to see their reflection, and beyond it, the faint shimmer of light. Even governments, once obsessed with progress, began to issue dark hours, weekly moments when every city turned off its lights, allowing the sky to breathe again. And during those hours, people gathered. Not to film, not to post, but to see Lyra's telescope became a symbol. They placed it in a glass case at the center of the global observatory, not as a scientific relic, but as an artifact of faith. Engraved on the base were the words from that notebook. "We never lost the stars. We only forgot to look." Years passed. Children grew up knowing what constellations were again. They learned to trace Orion's belt, the curve of Cassiopeia, the glow of Andromeda. And when they looked up, they didn't just see stars. They saw memory, legacy, and belonging. Lyra became an astronomer herself, dedicating her life to teaching others how to listen to the silence above. She never sought fame, nor believed she had saved anything. She always said the sky was patient. I just remembered its name. One evening, decades later, she returned to the same balcony where she had first looked through that telescope. The city was quieter now, the air clearer. She gazed upward, and for a moment, she thought she saw something impossible. Not just stars, but faint ribbons of light forming words across the heavens. She couldn't read them. Not fully, but she understood their meaning. It was the sky's way of saying thank you. She smiled and whispered, "You're welcome." Above her, the stars pulsed once more, steady, alive, ancient. And somewhere in the silence between light years, the memory of humanity echoed again. We conquered the sky once through power, but we found it again through wonder. We stopped looking up when we lost ourselves. And we became whole only when we remembered the stars, because in the end, To look up is to remember who we are.